Domestication is an evolutionary rather than a political development. They were more likely to survive and prosper in an alliance with humans than on their own. Humans provided the animals with food and protection, in exchange for which the animals provided the humans their milk and eggs and, yes, their flesh. A young man from a small provincial town, a man without independent wealth, without powerful family connections, and without a university education, moved to London in the late 1580s and in a remarkably short time became the greatest playwright not of his age alone but of all time. How did Shakespeare become Shakespeare? Moods may also have an effect on how information is processed, by influencing the extent to which judges rely on pre-existing internal information or focus on new external information. Positive moods promote more holistic and top-down processing style, while negative moods recruit more stimulus-driven and bottom-up processing. This finding is understandable in certain cases in spite of its high significance. That is because energy efficiency of building operation just represents a single aspect of sustainability. Yellow is the most optimistic color, yet surprisingly, people lose their tempers most often in yellow rooms and babies cry more in them. The reason may be that yellow is the hardest color on the eye. On the other hand, it speeds metabolism and enhances concentration. Think of yellow legal pads and post-it notes. Cheerful sunny yellow is an attention getter. While it is considered an optimistic color, people lose their tempers and more often in yellow rooms and babies will cry more. It is the most difficult color for the eye to take in, so it can be overpowering if overused. Yellow enhances concentration, hence its use for legal pads. It also speeds metabolism. Academic authors could do a better job of helping journalists, but often they have presented their work for fellow experts without signposts for lay readers. And just as often, reports demand a certainty about cancer that scientists cannot give. Because it is impossible to prove a negative, prudent doctors and researchers can never say for certain that something does not cause cancer. All they can say is that given the evidence, it is extremely unlikely. The problem begins with the alphabet itself, building a spelling system for English using letters that come from Latin. Despite the two languages not sharing exactly the same set of sounds, is like building a playroom using an IKEA office set. Akimbo. This must be one of the odder-looking words in the language. It puzzles us in part because it doesn't seem to have any relatives. What's more, it is now virtually a fossil word. Until recently, almost invariably found in arms akimbo, a posture in which a person stands with hands on hips and elbows sharply bent outward, one that signals impatience and hostility. 3 professors from Hamburg University's medical faculty travelled last month to Ingeborg's sitting room in East Berlin to test her on the work she carried out in pre-war Germany. In the fast-changing world of modern healthcare, the job of a doctor is more and more like the job of a chief executive. The people who run hospitals and physicians' practices don't just need to know medicine. They must also be able to balance budgets, motivate a large and diverse staff, and make difficult marketing and legal decisions. Botanic gardens are scientific and cultural institutions established to collect, study, exchange, and display plants for research and for the education and enjoyment of the public. There are major botanic gardens in each capital city. Zoological parks and aquariums are primarily engaged in the breeding, preservation, study, and display of native and exotic fauna in captivity. Since Plato, philosophers have described the decision-making process as either rational or emotional. We carefully deliberate or we blink and go with our gut. But as scientists break open the mind's black box with the latest tools of neuroscience, they're discovering that this is not how the mind works. Our best decisions are a finely tuned blend of both feeling and reason, and the precise mix depends on the situation. The brain is divided into 2 hemispheres, called the left and right hemispheres. Each hemisphere provided a different location of functions, behaviors, and controls. The right hemisphere is often called the creative side of the brain, while the left hemisphere is the logical or analytical side of the brain. Introverts, or those of us with introverted tendencies, tend to recharge by spending time alone. They lose energy from being around people for long periods of time, particularly large crowds. Extroverts, on the other hand, gain energy from other people. Extroverts actually find their energy is sapped when they spend too much time alone. They recharge by being social. Although introvert personality types differ from one another on various grounds, the major difference between the two is their source of rejuvenation. While for extroverts this may mean interaction or excursions with friends and family, the same may mean reading a book or listening to music for introverts. One of the unidentifiable objects in this study lies just outside Centaurus A, an elliptical galaxy located about 13 million light-years from Earth. The other is a globular cluster of stars located just outside NGC 4636, another elliptical galaxy located 47 million light-years from Earth in the constellation Virgo. Welfare has a special political meaning to the United States because it refers to how the poor receives financial aid. In comparison, welfare services are regarded as a universal right in other regions like Europe, where it is believed that all citizens should be able to obtain a minimal level of social support and well-being. Hard rock mining involve water pollution by metals themselves, chemicals used in processing, acid drainage, and sediment. Metals and metal-like elements in the ore are toxic and prone to cause trouble by ending up in nearby streams and water tables as a result of mining operations. Another administration option is to bake marijuana at a relatively low temperature to kill any dangerous microorganisms and then allow that patient to eat it or drink it. Both these methods of administration make smoking the drug unnecessary. However, criticism of medical marijuana has also been raised because, as a natural plant, it cannot be patented and marked by pharmaceutical companies and is unlikely to win widespread medical acceptance. The numbers on US student debt, after all, are truly staggering. The average 2015 US university graduate who took out loans to help pay for tuition enters the workforce with $35,000 in student debt. The insults and criticism were not unexpected. What was surprising was people's enthusiasm about the competition. Thousands have participated in the discussion. Who do you think is the most glamorous person? A biotechnologist who led his company in international research, an ordinary welder who gained international fame through his work, or a photographer complimented widely for a series of photos? In the photo, the wild cat's huge paws are clamped onto the side of the white safari jeep in which Chapel was a passenger. Almost as tall as the jeep on her hind legs, she appears to be forcing her muzzle into the back window. The Office of Personnel Management was the target of the attack, but data from nearly every government agency was stolen. US investigators say they believe Chinese hackers were behind the breach. While the Republican field is packed with male candidates, so far some of the sharpest Clinton critiques have come from women. Global warming is defined as an increase in the average temperature of the Earth's atmosphere. This trend began in the middle of the 20th century and is one of the major environmental concerns of scientists and governmental officials worldwide. The changes in temperature result mostly from the effect of increased concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. As far as politics go, the responses are just as varied. Mitigation is common and calls for a reduction of emission and less reliance on fossil fuels. Coal-burning power plants are now replaced with hydraulic power plants, and electrical cars are replacing some gasoline-efficient cars. Many people, however, feel that this is not enough. The border itself between Mexico and United States is fraught with a mix of urban and desert terrain and spans over 1,900 miles. Both the uninhabited areas of the border and urban areas are where the most drug trafficking and illegal crossings take place. Crime is prevalent in urban cities like El Paso, Texas, and San Diego, California. Free trade is an economic policy under which the government does not interfere with trade. No tariffs are applied to imports or exports, and people are allowed to trade goods and services as they please. Supply and demand dictates the price for which goods and services sell and are the only factors that determine how resources are allocated in the society. Unlike the United Kingdom, which has taken a relatively restrictive approach to the possession of arms, the United States has taken a more lenient approach. In the United States, 3 models have evolved regarding the interpretation of the meaning of the right to bear and keep arms as delineated in the Second Amendment. Trade unions originated in Europe during the Industrial Revolution. Because of the machinery that had become commonplace, skilled labor became less in demand, so employers had nearly all of the bargaining power. Employers mistreated the workers and paid them too little for the work they did. Trade unions were organized that would help in the improvement of working conditions. Unions take the power out of the employer's hands on many issues. There are examples of cases where workers were engaged in sexual or racial harassment but were protected by their unions and allowed to keep their jobs. Poor workers and excellent workers often receive the same pay and raises, giving no reason for a person to work harder than necessary at their job.
A smoking ban is a public policy that includes criminal laws on health regulations that prohibit smoking in certain public places and workspaces. There are varying definitions of smoking employed in this legislation. The strictest definitions define smoking as being the inhalation of any tobacco substance, while the loosest define smoking as possessing any lit tobacco product.
The speaker is a marine biologist who became interested in the strandlopers, an ancient people who lived on the coastline, because of their connection to the sea. Their way of life intrigued him. As a child, he had spent a lot of time by the sea, exploring and collecting things. So he began to study them, and discovered some interesting information about their way of life, how they hunted and what tools they used, and so on. Using more than 50 interviews, award-winning writer Danny Danziger creates a fascinating mosaic of the people behind New York's magnificent Metropolitan Museum of Art, from aristocratic, acerbic director of the museum, Felipe de Montebello, to the creators who have a deep knowledge and passionate appreciation of their collections, from the security guards to the philanthropists who keep the museum's financial lifeblood flowing. There are perhaps 3 ways of looking at furniture. Some people see it as purely functional and useful, and don't bother themselves with aesthetics. Others see it as essential to civilized living and concern themselves with design and how the furniture will look in a room. In other words, function combined with aesthetics, and yet others see furniture as a form of art. The climate for doing business improved in Egypt more than in any country last year, according to a global study that revealed a wave of company-orientated reforms across the Middle East. The World Bank ratings, which look at business regulations, also show that the pace of business reforms in Eastern Europe was overtaking East Asia. As a historian, if you really want to understand the sensibilities of those who lived in the past, you must be like a novelist and get the skins of your characters and think and feel as they do. You are asked to imagine what it is like to be a peasant in medieval times, asking the sort of questions a peasant might ask. What the writer is saying is that a historian needs imaginative sympathy with ordinary people in the past.
A recent trend in the entertainment world is to adapt classic works of literature for either TV or movies. One argument is that this is to everyone's benefit, as it introduces people to work they might otherwise never have, but is rarely done successfully.
Integration is increasingly needed in the business environment. This need emerges from the efficiency and synergy requirements necessary in a complex and turbulent environment. In other words, integration is needed to facilitate coordination, which is again related to the building of competitive advantage. There are 3 main interpretations of the English Revolution. The longest-lasting interpretation was that the revolution was the most inevitable outcome of an age-old power struggle between Parliament and Crown. The second sees it as a class struggle and a lead-up to the French and other revolutions. Finally, the third interpretation sees the other 2 as fixed, not allowing for unpredictability, and that the outcome could have gone either way. Dolphins, whales, and porpoises are all social animals, but some species are more sociable than others. This depends on the environment because species adopt the lifestyle more suitable for this. Among dolphins, forming groups makes it easier for them to find food, reproduce, and gain knowledge. They are safer too because dolphins can communicate danger when there are threats around. For centuries, Atlantis has been one of the Western world's favorite legends, a tantalizing blend of fantasy and mystery. Stories tell of a rich and glorious empire that was lost to the sea where some hope its ruins still lie, waiting to be discovered. Networking is easy and fun because it taps into this human predilection to talk about ourselves when asked. Consider successful networking as little more than the process of guiding a person to tell you about his life, what he's doing, the company that employs him, and his current industry. The second group that is particularly vulnerable are night shift workers, and the third group that is particularly vulnerable are people with sleep disorders, particularly sleep apnea. 1 of 3 men and 1 out of 6 women have sleep apnea, and yet 85% are undiagnosed and untreated, and it more than doubles the risk of crashes. For the purposes of argument, culture is divided into material and non-material, and the speaker's aim is to show how they both affect each other. Material development in tools and technology can affect non-material culture, our customs and beliefs, and the other way around. Genetics is used as an example, and it has changed the way we think about life, but also our beliefs have affected its rate of development. Thompson recognized and exploited all the ingredients of a successful amusement ride, writes Judith A. Adams in the American amusement park industry. His coasters combined an appearance of danger with actual safety, thrilled riders with exhilarating speed, and allowed the public to intimately experience the Industrial Revolution's new technology of gills, steer, and dazzling electric lights. The beginning of the 21st century will be remembered not for military conflicts or political events, but for a whole new age of globalization, a flattening of the world. The explosion of advanced technologies now mean that suddenly knowledge pools and resources have connected all over the planet, leveling the playing field as never before. At the beginning of each fiscal year, funds are allocated to each stateroom in accordance with the university's financial plan. Funds are allocated to each account by object of expenditure. Account managers are responsible for ensuring that adequate funds are available in the appropriate object before initiating transactions to use the funds. The one-year program of the Master in Global Management is designed only for those who have the graduate degree in the thesis, increasing temporary skills of new managers in an international capacity, something that recruiters are looking for more and more. Lincoln's apparently radical change of mind about his war power to emancipate slaves was caused by the escalating scope of war, which convinced him that any measure to weaken the Confederacy and strengthen the Union war effort was justifiable as a military necessity. Food is one of the most important things you'll ever buy, and yet most people never bother to think about their food and where it comes from. People spend a lot more time worrying about what kind of blue jeans to wear, what kind of video games to play, and what kind of computers to buy. Tesla came over from Graz and went to work for Thomas Edison. Nonetheless, Edison offered him a job, promising Tesla $50,000 if Tesla could redesign Edison's breakdown prone DC generator design. The new generator designs were a vast improvement over Edison's originals. Upon completing the job, Tesla went to Edison to collect the $50,000 promised for the task. "Tesla," Edison replied, "you don't understand our American humor," and Tesla was never paid. By beginning so early, he knows that he has plenty of time to do thoroughly all the work he can be expected to do. All his work having been finished in good time, he has a long interval of rest in the evening before the timely hour when he goes to bed. After a sound night's rest, he rises early next morning in good health and spirits for the labors of a new day. The tsunamis could provide crucial information about the habitability of ancient Mars. The first one occurred when the planet must have been relatively warm and amenable for life, because it carved out backwash channels as it returned to the sea. By contrast, the planet had become much cooler by the time the second tsunami hit. The water apparently flash froze after flowing onto the surface. It seems that language appeared from nowhere, since no other species has anything resembling human language. However, other animals do possess basic systems for perceiving and producing sounds that enable them to communicate. These systems may have been in place before the appearance of language. The coastal wetlands have environmental and economic importance. Wetlands provide natural wealth. They have important filtering capabilities. As the water runoff passes, they retain excess nutrients and some pollutants. They maintain water flow during dry periods. Thousands of people depend on groundwater for drinking. They act as natural sponges of floodwaters and contain soil erosion. Analysts were impressed by the improvement in margins reported across all regions, apart from the United Kingdom, and said that this reflected a clear effort to improve profitability across the business. Although the turnaround is still in its early stages, and the valuation looks full given the challenge of turning around such a large and complex business, this is certainly an impressive start. The core of the problem was the immense disparity between the country's productive capacity and the ability of people to consume. Great innovations in productive techniques during and after the war raised the output of industry beyond the purchasing power of US farmers and earners. When countries assess their annual carbon dioxide emissions, they count up their cars and power stations. But bushfires are not included, presumably because they are deemed to be events beyond human control. In Australia, Victoria alone sees several 100,000 hectares burned each year in both 2004 and the present summer. The figure has been over 1 million hectares. While blue is one of the most popular colors, it is one of the least appetizing. Blue food is rare in nature. Food researchers say that when humans search for food, they learn to avoid toxic or spoiled objects, which were often blue, black, or purple. When food dyed blue is served to study subjects, they lose appetite. If you have a chronic disease such as heart disease, diabetes, asthma, or back or joint pain, exercise can have important health benefits. However, it is important to talk to your doctor before starting an exercise routine. He or she might have advice on what exercises are safe and any precautions you might need to take while exercising. In an attempt to lure new students, leading business schools including Harvard, Stanford, the University of Chicago, and Wharton have moved away from the unofficial missions and prerequisite of 4 years work experience and instead have set their sights on recent college graduates and so-called early career professionals with only a couple of years of work under their belt. Marriage is a big step in anyone's life, and there is an argument to be made against getting married too early. As any newlywed couple knows, there is a huge amount of financial pressure associated with marriage. Firstly, the wedding reception and honeymoon will cost you an arm and a leg. Then there's the matter of home loans, rent, and energy bills. If you're looking to start a family, your child's education is another thing you need to save up for. Teenagers should probably find a proper job before deciding to tie the knot. At the end of this year, we will launch the Cup class boats. So these will be about twice the power. The sailors are down in cockpits, unlike today. A lot of power is being generated by these 4 grinders that are providing hydraulic power, and that energy is being used to control the flying surface. The hydrofoil end is also being used to control the wing and the flaps, effectively the engine of what we have. Howard believed that all clouds belong to 3 distinct groups: cumulus, stratus, and cirrus. He added a 4th category, nimbus, to describe a cloud in the act of condensation into rain, hail, or snow. It is by observing how clouds change color and shape that weather can be predicted, and as long as the first 3 of cloud keep their normal shape, there won't be any rain. It is difficult to tell whether the speaker approves of Hemingway's lifestyle or not. He was famously macho and spent a lot of time hunting wild animals, going to wars, and getting into fights. All these things got into his books, and the speaker thinks that this is not necessarily a good thing, as it means that too many people prefer to read about his life than to read his books. You may have heard of the new fad known as ecotourism. This means tourism which is environmentally friendly and conscious about conserving the environment. The key is to minimize the physical, social, and behavioral impacts of overseas travel. Tour groups will often work with local and Indigenous communities to redesign respectful and memorable programs for visitors. Charles Darwin published his paper on the origin of species in 1859. It is one of the most well-known pieces of scientific literature in human history. In the paper, Darwin proposes the theory of natural selection. He states that for any generation of any species, there will always be a struggle for survival. Individuals who are better suited to the environment are fitter and therefore have a much higher chance of surviving and reproducing. This means that later generations are likely to inherit these stronger genetic traits. Life expectancy has increased dramatically in the last century. Most people these days will live for over 70 years. This is more than double the lifespan of the average human in the 17th century. We can attribute our longevity to advances in medicine and lifestyle. While everyone agrees that living longer is wonderful, overpopulation is becoming a serious environmental concern. Many people believe that employers discriminate against older people because youths have more energy and creativity. This is not true. The main reason for hiring younger workers is payroll. In most countries, your salary is dependent on how many years of work experience you have. It is far more cost-effective to hire postgraduates fresh out of university than senior staff with over 20 years of industry knowledge. Roman writers and orators began to expand the imaginative and intellectual horizons and refine the Latin language through the study of Greek literature. Early Roman literature had two kinds: the recording and examination of public life and behavior, through life stories of famous men, and particularly Roman art of satirical comedy and drama. The researchers think that long-distance flyers, such as the American golden plover and the white-rumped sandpiper, picked up the spores while lining their nests. Then, when the birds arrive in new places, they molt, leaving behind the feathers and their precious cargo to start growing again at the other end of the world. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, up to 18 miles wide, and attains a depth of over a mile. While the specific geologic processes and timing that form the Grand Canyon are the subject of debate by geologists, recent evidence suggests the Colorado River established its course through the canyon at least 17 million years ago. How do we imagine the unimaginable? If we're asked to think of an object, say a yellow tulip, a picture immediately forms in our mind's eye. But what if we try to imagine a concept, such as the square root of a negative number? The situation is similar to a pregnant woman that has twin babies in her belly. Avi Loeb of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. He's proposing the idea in a paper that's been accepted for publication in the Astrophysical Journal Letters. Although it hails from a remote region of the western Himalayas, this plant now looks entirely at home on the banks of English rivers. Brought to the UK in 1839, it quickly escaped from Victorian gardens and colonized river banks and damp woodlands. It is spreading across Europe, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. The development of easy-to-use statistical software has changed the way statistics is being taught and learned. Students can make transformations of variables, create graphs of distributions of variables, and select among statistical analyses at the click of a button. However, even with these advancements, students sometimes still find statistics to be an arduous task. Parents can communicate their personal feelings about undesirable programs both by discouraging their children from watching them and by writing to their local television station or to the program sponsors. The public does have a voice. Clearly, not all programs need please everybody. We do have a choice of programs, and we also have a choice for ourselves and at least for our younger children of watching or not watching. There is an off button on every set. Parents need to take control of the television viewing of preschoolers and children of early school age. A workable technique is to make a simple but firm weekly plan as to what programs will be permitted and how much time overall may be spent in viewing. Any child's weekly schedule normally involves a certain amount of time for school, naps, outdoor play, and indoor. Each tube-shaped mic robot is a sandwich of 3 materials: a graphene outer layer which binds to heavy metals, a middle layer of nickel which gives the bots magnetic polarity so they can be pulled through wastewater with magnets, and platinum inside for propulsion. Just add a bit of peroxide to the wastewater and it'll react with a platform to form water and oxygen bubbles which propel the tubes along. Trump has threatened to declare China a currency manipulator, but experts say he has little legal or economic basis to take such a step. He has also threatened to impose a tariff of up to 45% on Chinese imports if Beijing doesn't behave, a move that could lead to a trade war and damage the economies of both nations. To understand the past, you have to be able, as far as possible, to think as the people in the period you are studying thought. The example of what it must have been like to be a peasant in the Middle Ages is used. However, sensibilities change over time and we can't completely throw off the mentality of the present. Therefore, every age will have a slightly different perspective on the same period of the past, no matter what the facts are. A university is not a business. More precisely, a not-for-profit college or university is significantly different than a for-profit business. A university has no owners, it is a public trust. Without owners, it has no one to pay dividends to, and no one for whom it must maximize its profits. A business has a single overriding goal, the maximization of return for the owners. A university has a multiplicity of goals, to foster learning, to create knowledge, and to serve its community. Britain then was slower to create and develop a police force than the rest of Europe. France had one long before, indeed, the word police is taken from the French. This fact was not unimportant, as the very idea of a police force was seen as foreign, that is French, and particularly undesirable, and was generally regarded as a form of oppression. This study marks the first time scientists have linked dike formation to large damaging earthquakes, and Warthia is looking back through history for more examples. She says researchers will never be able to predict exactly when an earthquake might strike after a dike intrusion. But at least now, researchers and rift zone residents know they are not just in for bangs, but they also must be in for shudders. Study author Samuel Cheyenne, a materials scientist, says this smart glass is cheaper than others and uses minimal power much less, for example, than something like a curling iron. As since it's flexible and foldable, he says it could even be used for things like camouflage uniforms to switch, for example, from green to brown to white and grey. This would be very useful when the background landscape suddenly changes, such as during early snowfall. The caterpillars that feed on trees are trying to match the hatching of their eggs to the timing of bud burst. The caterpillars want to feed on the juiciest and least chemically protected leaves. And it's not just the caterpillars, of course, that are important, but the knock-on effect is on nesting birds, which are also trying to hatch their chicks at the same time that there's the maximum number of caterpillars. But they did find something that had a much bigger impact on wildlife: habitat quality. The best predictor of wildlife abundance was not human activity, but factors like forest connectivity, nearby housing density, and the amount of adjacent agriculture. The results were published in the Journal of Applied Ecology. Historically, what has been used to estimate bats has been photographic estimates, visual estimates, mark recapture estimates, and those have been highly prone to bias. Newer technology, like thermal imaging cameras, is accurate but expensive. So at a time of epic but mortality due to, for example, the fungal white nose syndrome that's wiping out bats in Canada and the US, Cloper says her method might be cheap, reliable to determine the most critical caves to save. In the Middle Ages, the design and use of flags were considered a means of identifying social status. Flags were therefore the symbol not of nations but of nobility. The design of each flag resembled the devices on the noble coat of arms, and the size of the flags were an indication of how high the owner stood in the nobility. History rubs shoulders and often overlaps with many other areas of research, from myths and epics to the social sciences including economics, politics, biography, demography, and much else besides. Some histories are almost pure narratives while others go in for detailed, tightly focused analysis, for example, the parish records of a Cornish village in the 16th century. Humans need to use energy in order to exist, so it is unsurprising that the way people have been producing energy is largely responsible for current environmental problems. Pollution comes in many forms, but those that are most concerning because of their impact on health resulting from the combustion of fuels in power stations and cars. Not a lot is known about how the transportation of goods by water first began. Large cargo boats were being used in some parts of the world up to 5,000 years ago. However, sea trade became more widespread when large sailing boats travelled between ports, carrying spices, perfumes, and objects made by hand. Market research is a vital part of the planning of any business. However, experienced you or your staff may be in a particular field if you are thinking of introducing a service to a new area. It is important to find out what the local population thinks about it first. It's not that human activities didn't impact wildlife at all, of course. Heavily hunted species like white-tailed deer, grey squirrels and raccoons were photographed somewhat less often in hunted areas. Coyotes showed up more often in hunted areas. While most species didn't avoid hiding trails, the predators actually preferred them. Usually, age is determined by physical characteristics such as teeth or bones. Great, if you have a body. Researchers have tried unsuccessfully to use blood, but in this study, the scientists used immune cells called T cells. T cells recognize invaders through receptors that match molecules on bacteria, viruses, even tumors. The cellular activity that produces these receptors also produce a type of circular DNA molecule as a byproduct. Rees took a stab at settling the argument with a meta-analysis, a study of studies on whether people can really perceive better than CD quality sound. He analysed data from 18 studies, including more than 400 participants and nearly 13,000 listening tests. Overall, listeners picked out the better than CD quality track 52.3% of the time. Statistically significant, if not at all that impressive. A university is a lot more than just classes and exams. The university is a concept that offers you a host of possibilities to develop both academically and personally. Find out about the different projects, clubs, and societies that are in your university. You will definitely find something you are interested in. Many papers you write in college will require you to include quotes from one or more sources. Even if you don't have to do it, integrating a few quotes into your writing can add life and persuasiveness to your arguments. The key is to use quotes to support a point you're trying to make rather than just include them to fill space. The student's reading in his own subject slows down, and his comprehension becomes less secure. He expresses himself slowly and often fails to convey his ideas exactly. He is disappointed to find that under pressure he makes a lot of unnecessary mistakes in areas where he knows the correct language forms. His social relations are difficult as he cannot find the right phrase quickly enough to keep a conversation going, so his language often betrays him into dullness, coldness, or worst of all, rudeness. Instead of the students being in control of the language seems to now be in control of the students. In the past, naming English as a separate subject seemed relatively easy. The textbook selected and graded items of language which were put into content and then practiced intensively. New items were carefully controlled so that the student could cope quite easily. Now that English is used as a medium of instruction, however, all this has changed. Unknown items of grammar and vocabulary appear in texts which attempt to explain new and often difficult information. Difficulties with the language interact with difficulties as regards the subject matter. It may well change the way you live yet again. Welcome to the world mobile commerce where your handheld device, it a mobile phone, a personal digital assistant, PDA, or any other wireless application will soon be used for commercial transactions. Skeptical? Consider these facts. In Japan, mobile phones are used for location-based services where the mobile service provider tie up with a host of other players such as restaurants, car rental companies, etc. When the mobile user enters that zone, messages from all these players are flashed on the mobile device. Location-based services are proved in several other countries as well. In a genuine republic, the will of the government is dependent on the will of the society, and the will of the society is dependent on the reason of the society. In Federalist 51, for example, James Madison claimed that the extent and structure of the government of the United States makes it dependent on the will of the society. In 2005, donor countries agreed on an accord to harmonize their practices. Since then, aid officials have complained that too little has changed on the ground. Conferences of donors in developing countries still tend to be dominated by a small group of North European governments, with the US often absent. Free trade is an economic policy under which the government does not interfere with trade. No tariffs are applied to imports or exports, and people are allowed to trade goods and services as they please. Supply and demand dictate the prices for which goods and services sell, and are the only factors that determine how resources are allocated to society. The development of easy-to-use statistics is being taught and learned. Students can make transformations of variables, create graphs of distributions of variables, and select among statistical analysis all at the click of a button. However, even with these advancements, students sometimes find statistics to be an arduous task. First discovered in 2007, fast radio burst continues to defy explanation. These cosmic chirps last 1,000th of a second. The characteristics of the radio pulses suggest that they come from galaxies billions of light years away. However, new works point to a much closer origin-flaring star within our own galaxy. Ever since I remembered, Father woke up at 5:30 every morning, made breakfast for us all, and read newspaper. After that, he would go to work. He worked as a writer. It was a long time before I realized he did this for a living. Certain types of methodology are more suitable for some research projects than for others. For example, the use of questionnaires and surveys is more suitable for quantitative research, whereas interviews and focus groups are more often used for qualitative research purposes.
Surprisingly, despite what appears to be infinite variations, all difficult conversations share a common structure. When you're caught up in the details and anxiety of a particularly difficult conversation, this structure is hard to see. But understanding that structure is essential to improving how you handle your most challenging conversations. It isn't rate for private equity houses to hire grads fresh out of business school, but 9 times out of 10, the students who nab these jobs are the ones who had private equity experience before even starting their MBA program. The Founding Fathers established constitutional protections for the press because they understood that leaving the watchdog function to partisan politicians wouldn't necessarily serve the public interest. Both sides have too many incentives to preserve the status quo and ignore problems that elude quick fixes. Weakness in electronics, auto and gas station sales dragged down overall retail sales last month, but excluding those 3 categories, retailers enjoyed healthy increases across the board according to government figures released Wednesday. Moreover, December sales numbers were also revised higher. Where there are effects, there are often side effects. The car is a boon to mobility but can lead to obesity, deaths, and pollution. Burning fossil fuels may keep economies going but wrecks the climate in the long run. In a similar way, there are side efforts to information technology in education settings, from childcare to the classroom to the lecture hall and beyond. Exhilarating, exhausting, and intense. There are just some of the words used to describe doing an MBA. Everyone's experience of doing MBA is, of course, different, through denying that it's hard and demanding work whichever course you do. MBA is one of the fastest growing areas of study in the UK, so there must be a sustainable benefit against form in pain. The uniquely scented flavour of vanilla is second only to chocolate in popularity on the world's palate. It's also the second most expensive spice after saffron. But highly labour-intensive cultivation methods and the plant's temperamental life cycle and propagation means production on a global scale is struggling to keep up with the increasing demand for the product. This book is no ordinary book and should not be read through from beginning to end. It contains many different adventures, and the path you take will depend on the choices that you make along the way. The success or failure of your missions will depend on the decisions you make, so think carefully before choosing. The semiconductor industry has been able to improve the performance of electric systems for more than 4 decades by making ever smaller devices. However, this approach will soon encounter both scientific and technical limits, which is why the industry is exploring a number of alternative device technologies. 2 sisters were at a dinner party when the conversation turned to upbringing. The elder sister started to say that her parents had been very strict and that she had been rather frightened of them. Her younger sister, younger by 2 years, interrupted in amazement. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Our parents were very lenient." The Japanese tea ceremony is a tour influenced by Buddhism in which green tea is prepared and served to a small group of guests in a peaceful setting. The ceremony can take as long as 4 hours, and there are many traditional gestures that both the server and the guest must perform. In Japan, tea ceremony is a ritual-like formalism in which green tea you prepare and serve to multiple guests in a tea-full setting. The ceremony can take as long as 4 hours, and there are many tradition gestures that the server and the guests must perform. For any marketing course that requires the development of a marketing plan, such as marketing management, marketing strategy, and principles of marketing, this is the only planning handbook that guides students through step-by-step creation of a customized marketing plan while offering commercial software to aid in the process. Legal writing is usually less discursive than writing in other humanities subjects, and precision is more important than variety. Sentence structure should not be too complex. It is usually unnecessary to make extensive use of adjectives or adverbs, and consistency of terms is often required. Long isolated from Western Europe, Russia grew up without participating in the development like the Reformation that many Russians take pride in their unique culture find dubious value. Russia is, as a result, the most unusual number of European family, if indeed it is European at all. The question is still open to debate, particularly among Russians themselves. For diplomacy, the starting point must be that globalization requires bridges and removes barriers. A policy of containment is a difficult strategy in the age of the fiber optic cable, the jumbo jet, and the satellite dish. There will always be the exception, such as the murderous regime in Iraq, where the only safe strategy is to keep it in the isolation ward until it accepts the norms of international behavior, or the military dictatorship in Burma, which has persistently failed to respond to dialogue. It takes 2 to critically engage. As to the Industrial Revolution, one cannot dispute today the fact that it has succeeded in inaugurating in a number of countries a level of mass prosperity which was undreamt of in the days preceding the Industrial Revolution. But on the immediate impact of the Industrial Revolution, there were substantial divergences among writers.
Major breeding areas, and breeding islands, are shown as dark green areas or darts. Open darts are shown no breeding records on islands, and are also used for offshore sightings, that is from ships or boats. Other areas where species are not meant to be seen are plain pale green, with pale green hatching where records that are usually sparse. The diversity of human language may be compared to the diversity of the natural world. Just as the demise of plant species reduces genetic diversity, and deprives humanity of potential medical and biological resources, so extinction of language takes with it a wealth of culture, art and knowledge.
In classes, your teachers will talk about topics that you are studying. The information that they provide will be important to know when you take tests. You must be able to take good written notes from what your teachers say. This is what needs to happen on climate change. The world needs to put a price on carbon emissions and let the market respond. If politicians pretend this can be done without pain, it will probably result in another 5 to 10 years of pretending to take action. How quickly is the world's population growing? In the United States and other developed countries, the current growth rate is very low. In most developing countries, the human population is growing at a rate of 3% per second. Because of this bustling growth rate, the human population is well on its way to reaching 9 billion within lifetime. If bonus or incentive pay schemes work so well for chief executive and bankers, why does everyone not get them? After all, many jobs involve making important decisions or taking risks. Is there anything about corporate decision and financial risks that makes these categories of work special in terms of how they need to be incentivized and rewarded? Living room is the most used part that withholds most of the traffic coming in and out of the house. It is highly recommended that the flooring should be strong enough that it can endure all such amendments done with your furniture or to the increasing and decreasing ratio of visitors. For this purpose, you can opt for hardwood flooring. Being classy and sophisticated in look, it is the perfect choice for your living room whenever you are remodeling your home. Solar energy is an excellent source of supplying power to homes and companies, and by utilizing solar power, you're not merely protecting the environment from being polluted, but also you are saving the rest of the Earth's natural resources. Capturing solar energy does not contribute to any pollution and does not harm the atmosphere. One of the factors why many individuals are still hesitant to make use of solar power is because it is expensive. The need of big location of space is another reason why people aren't taking into consideration solar power. The brain is divided into its hemispheres by a prominent groove. At the base of this lies nerve fibers, which enable these two halves of the brain to communicate with each other. But the left hemisphere usually controls movement and sensation in the right side of the body, while the right hemisphere similarly controls the left side of the body. Competence in mathematics was another trouble spot. More than half said that their real task schools graduates are deficient in mathematics. More than 10% of respondents said college graduates are deficient in the subject, while 70% said they are adequate. Few things in the world produce such amazement as one's first of clippers of the Grand Canyon. It took around more than 2 billion years to create this vast wonder in some places. 17 miles wide, largely through the relentless force of Colorado River, which runs 277 miles along its length, a mile beneath its towering rims. Along with customary classes on subjects such as finance, accounting, and marketing, today's MBA students are enrolling on courses for environmental policy and stewardship. Indeed, more than half of business schools require a course in environmental sustainability or corporate social responsibility, according to a survey of 91 US business schools, published in October 2005. Tesla's theoretical work formed the basis of modern alternating current electric power systems. Thomas Edison promised him almost $1 million in today's money to undertake motor and generator improvement. However, when Tesla unethical Serbs asked about the money, Edison reported reply, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." The pair became arch rivals. First-year university students have designed and built a groundbreaking electric car that recharges itself. 50 students from the University of Sydney's Faculty of Engineering spent 5 months cobbling together bits of plywood, foam and fiberglass to build the Man-Go concept car. They developed the specifications and hand-built the car. It's a pretty radical design, a 4-wheel drive with a motor in each wheel. Australians do speak English. However, for some tourists and travellers, it can be difficult to understand the slang. Also, the links between Australian and American English were seen to be very tenuous. At least some colloquialisms in Australian English does not exist in other types of English. The provision of accurate and authoritative statistical information strengthens modern societies. It provides a basis for decisions to be made on such things as where to open schools and hospitals, how much money to spend on welfare payments, and even which football players to replace at half-time.
Modern buildings have to achieve certain performance requirements, at least to satisfy those of building codes to provide a safe, healthy and comfortable environment. However, these conditioned environments demand resources in energy and materials, which are both limited in supply to build and operate.
Fence, humanly erected barrier between two divisions of land, used to mark a legal or other boundary, to keep animals or people in or out, and sometimes as an ornament. In newly settled land, fences are usually made of materials at hand, for example, stone, earth, or wood. Northcote Parkinson, a British writer, formulated Parkinson's rule. Work expands to fill the time allotted to it. Or conversely, the amount of work completed is in inverse proportion to the number of people employed. Simply said, if you have an hour to do a 5-minute job, it will take an hour to do it. A large number of people accomplish less work than a smaller number of people. The quest for a user-friendly copyright regime began a decade ago, when the Hong Kong government launched a public consultation on copyright protection in the digital environment in December 2006. Although this consultation initially sought to address internet-related challenges, such as those caused by peer-to-peer file-sharing technology, the reform effort quickly evolved into a more comprehensive digital upgrade of the Hong Kong copyright regime. Your body is composed of trillions of cells, lots of different types of cells that make up different organs and other parts of your body. Your body is also where 10 times that number of bacteria call home sweet home. But don't be afraid, these bacteria do more good than harm to you. And besides, just in case you wanted to strike up a conversation with your tenants, you and your bacteria do have a few things in common. What we found is that the plant is actually damaged by herbivores, like most plants are in nature. And in response to that, it secretes sugar from the wound edges where the herbivores have damaged the plant. Tobias Lortzing is a graduate student at Freie University Berlin and one of the study authors. Kinderman says he thinks the compound could be a win-win for the planet and the animals. You know, the methane is kind of a waste product, and this energy, instead of losing it for the animal, it can be reused for the animal in terms of performance. And at the same time, we are doing something for greenhouse gas emission and climate change. The product's not on the market yet. Toxicology tests are ongoing. By this time, however, paleontological momentum had moved to England. In 1812, at Lyme Regis on the Dorset coast, an extraordinary child named Mary Anning, aged 11, 12, or 13, depending on whose account you read, found a strange fossilized sea monster, 17 feet long and now known as the Ichthyosaurus, embedded in the steep and dangerous cliffs along the English Channel. Clementson wanted to see if claims of question dodging actually held up. Historically, not necessarily in the unique case of Trump. So Clementson analysed the transcripts of 14 presidential debates from 1996 to 2012. Overall, he found 51 accusations of question dodging, 26 by Dems, 25 by Republicans. Some people object that in order for the eye to modify and still remain a useful instrument to its owner, many changes would have had to take place simultaneously. However, it is not necessary to suppose this if the modifications were extremely slight and gradual. The curriculum enhances the general management program with health-related courses, Dr. Schluman says. Required courses include healthcare in the 21st century and the economics and strategy of health sector management. Students may also take electives such as medical device commercialization, healthcare marketing, and the economics and management of the pharmaceutical industry. The English Revolution has been interpreted in several ways by historians. as a fight between the aristocratic cavaliers who were open to life and the serious Parisians as a battle for power between Parliament and the monarchy over the rights of Englishmen that had been going on for centuries, and as a class war similar to the French Revolution of which it was a forerunner. The term supernova was coined in the 1930s by a memorably odd astrophysicist named Fritz Zwicky. Born in Bulgaria and raised in Switzerland, Zwicky came to the California Institute of Technology in the 1920s, and there as once distinguished himself by his abrasive personality and erratic talents. He didn't seem to be outstandingly bright, and many of his colleagues considered him little more than an irritating buffoon. In comparing material with non-material culture, the first being the objects and technologies we create, and the second our customs, beliefs, and attitudes, the speaker gives greater emphasis to the material culture. He gives the example of the development of genetic science and the benefits it has brought to mankind, despite a fair amount of opposition. Psychologist Seiho Takagi, a graduate student at Kyoto University in Japan, strolls into one of Japan's many cat cafes. These establishments allow customers to pay an hourly fee for the chance to cuddle some cats. They're popular in Japan because so many apartment buildings forbid pet ownership. But Takagi isn't a typical customer. She's not there for feline affection, but to probe their minds. They controlled for the bird's age, sex, body size, and species, and they found that the hunted specimen's brains were actually 5% smaller on average than the brains of birds that died by other means. The surprising thing is that if you make a smaller kind of analysis of liver or heart size, there is absolutely no difference there. So this is specific to the brain. Shrimp farmers used to hold animals in nursery ponds for 30 to 60 days. Now they tried to move them into grow-out ponds in less than 30 days. This reduces stress on the animals and dramatically increases survivals in the grow-out ponds. Many farms that abandoned nursery ponds have gone back to them, and the results have been surprisingly positive. They're using the old, uncovered earthen nursery ponds. Orientalists, like many other 19th century thinkers, conceive of humanity either in large collective terms or in abstract generalities. Orientalists are neither interested in nor capable of discussing individuals. Instead, artificial entities predominate. Similarly, the age-old distinction between Europe and Asia, or Occident and Orient, herds beneath very wide labels every possible variety of human plurality, reducing it in the process to one or two terminal collective realities. The next wave of leaders in industrial manufacturing will build an ecosystem that capitalizes on the promise of analytics and connectivity to maximize efficiency for themselves and their customers. They will map out their strategies and prioritize measures that will bring the most value to their business, starting now with pilot projects and building greater strengths in data analytics with cross-functional teams of experts. Researchers have found that divorce has different kinds of negative impacts on the planet, including higher demand for resources and a lower rate of efficiency in the use of household resources. People have been talking about how to protect the environment and combat climate change, but divorce is an overlooked factor that needs to be considered. The elephant is the largest living land mammal. During evolution, its skeleton has greatly altered from the usual mammal design for two main reasons. One is to cope with the great weight of huge grinding cheek teeth and elongated tusk, making the skull particularly massive. The other is to support the enormous bulk of such a huge body. Business school admissions officers said the new drive to attract younger students was in part the result of a realization that they had inadvertently limited their applicant pool by requiring several years' work experience. Talented students who might otherwise have gone to business school instead opted for a law or policy degree because they were intimidated by the expectation of work experience. A hazard assessment should be performed for work involving distillations of organic liquids and should thoroughly address issues relating to residual water and possible decomposition of the solvent in question, as well as the physical placement of the distillation apparatus and heating equipment to be employed. The training of an actor is an intensive process which requires curiosity, courage, and commitment. You will learn how to prepare for rehearsal, how to rehearse, and how to use independent and proactive processes that inform you to do the best work possible for both stage and screen. Globalization has affected what we eat in ways we are only beginning to understand. More and more food production no longer related to our biological needs but is indirectly conflict with them. The relationship between diet and our fertility, our cancer, heart diseases, and mental illness is becoming clear, yet much of our food is nutritionally bankrupt. Traditional divisions of domestic work are understood to persist because of the strong association of the home with humanity and with masculinity to challenge that home is arguably equivalent to challenge what is to beat a woman or a man. Perhaps the most memorable benefit of the program has been the opportunity to meet in small groups, something that is difficult to arrange in such a desperate organisation. Many officers would have to work together for 30 years but would not know others' strength and weakness. The department determines whether or not the candidate has passed the examination. In cases where an appearance for the final public oral examination would constitute a substantial financial hardship for the candidate, the Director of Graduate Studies may recommend to the Dean of the Graduate School that the examination be waived. Companies will want to be known not just for the financial results they generate, but equally for the imprint they leave on society as a whole. First, ensuring that their products contribute positively. Second, operating in a way that approaches a net neutral impact to the natural environment. And third, cherishing their people.
When we recycle, used materials are converted into new products, reducing the need to consume natural resources. If used materials are not recycled, new products are made by extracting fresh, raw material from the earth, through mining and forestry. Recycling helps conserve important raw materials and protects natural habitats for the future.
Historically, what has been used to estimate bats has been photographic estimates, visual estimates, mark recapture estimates, and those have been highly prone to bias. Newer technology, like thermal imaging cameras, is accurate, but expensive. So at a time of epic bat mortality due to, for example, the fungal white nose syndrome that's wiping out bats in Canada and the US. Although Botswana's economic outlook remains strong, the devastation that AIDS has caused threatens to destroy the country's future. In 2001, Botswana has the highest rates of HIV infection in the world. With the help of international donors, it launched an ambitious national campaign that provided a free antiviral drugs to anyone who needs them. And by March 2004, Botswana's infection rate has dropped significantly. Public demand for education has remained strong, reflecting the importance of education as a means of social progress. Aware of the social value of education to the world of the work, the government continues to innovate and update the education system in order to produce a qualified and competent workforce. The preparation of abstract is an intellectual effort requiring general familiarity with the subject to bring out of the point of an author's argument calls for skills and experience. Consequently, a considerable amount of qualified manpower that could be used to advantage in other ways must be diverted to the task of facilitating or to information. Hundreds of millions of American people eat fast food every day without giving it too much thought, unaware of the subtle and not so subtle ramifications of their purchases. They just grab their tray off the counter, find a table, take a seat, unwrap the paper, and dig in. The whole experience is transitory and soon forgotten. The free market is extremely competitive and companies are constantly trying to gain an edge over their rivals. Merchandising and brand image play a major role in attracting customers, but they often lead to overpackaging. This is a serious problem, since most packaging these days are made of plastics, which are not biodegradable. Some people blame the manufacturers for their blatant disregard, while others point the fingers at consumers. It seems that when it comes to love, men and women are designed to misconstrue, misread, and misunderstand one another and themselves. You discover that, in fact, they make good sense. Being a deluded romantic is often the best way to make a good biologically successful choice about a potential partner on the basis. Scientists know little about how exactly it works, especially when it comes to complex functions like memory formation. Research is more advanced in animals, but experiments on humans are hard. Yet, even today, some parts of the brain, like the motor cortex, are better understood. Nor is complete knowledge always needed. Machine learning can recognize patterns of neural activity. The brain itself gets the hang of controlling BCIS with extraordinary ease, and neurotechnology will reveal more of the brain's secrets. This year, the National Environmental Science Competition received excellent undergraduate and postgraduate entries from all across the country, with a wide range of projects. We are delighted that our awards are encouraging, exciting, and valuable projects that go beyond research and analysis to develop solutions for a number of key problems. Information about the shortlisted projects will be posted on our website in the first week in June. Scientific studies show that by age 3, there is a gap in brain development between kids who read aloud and those who do not, and children from low-income families are disproportionately impacted by this gap. Making sure all parents know the importance of reading aloud to their children is critical to closing this achievement gap. The grid-based infrastructure enables large-scale scientific applications to be run on distributed resources. However, in practice, grid resources are not very easy to use for the end users, who have to learn how to generate security credentials. There is an imminent need to provide transparent access to these resources so that the end users are shielded from the complicated details. Social media are playing an increasingly important role as information sources for travelers. The goal of this study is to investigate the extent to which social media appear in search engine results in the context of travel-related searches. It also provides evidence for challenges faced by traditional providers of travel-related information. A mental illness is a health problem that significantly affects how a person feels, thinks, behaves, and interacts with other people. People may experience mental illnesses, and their family and friends suffer a great deal due to these illnesses. According to the World Health Organization, depression will be one of the biggest health problems worldwide by the year 2020. A national study into fraud by bookkeepers employed at small and medium-sized businesses has uncovered 65 instances of theft in more than 5 years, with more than $31 million stolen. Of the cases identified by the research, 56 involved women and 9 instances involved men. However, male bookkeepers who defrauded their employer stole 3 times on average the amount that women stole. The physical location of a restaurant in the competitive landscape of the city has long been known as a major factor in its likely success or failure. Once restaurants are established in such environments, they can do little about their location. All they can do is work to improve customer access to their premises. Restaurateurs often do this by engaging in battles with local authorities about car parking. DeLone and McLean's model has been criticized by some authors. Indeed, this model is specific to contexts of voluntary use of information technology. The usage variable remains a success variable of information systems if the user himself decides to adopt or reject the technology. However, for mandatory uses, such as for ERP systems, the use of the technology is obvious. The success of information systems cannot, therefore, be measured by usage. The best comparison is likely a magnetar, a young neutron star with a powerful magnetic field, the researchers said. Magnetars also produce bright X-ray flares. While magnetars are thought to be young stars, the 2 flaring objects in this study reside near elliptical galaxies which contain older stars, so the objects are likely too old to be magnetars, the researchers said. Beauty contests, whether it's Miss Universe or Miss Teen International, are demeaning to women and out of sync with the times. Opponents say that they are nothing more than symbols of decline. Since Australians Jennifer Hawkins and Lauren Eagle were crowned Miss Universe and Miss Teen International respectively, there has been a dramatic increase in interest in beauty pageants in this country. Electronic discourse is one form of interactive electronic communication. In this study, we reserved the term for the two-directional text in which one person using a keyboard writes language that appears on the slender's monitor and is transmitted to the monitor of a recipient who responds by keyboard. As we progress into the 21st century, communications are becoming faster and faster. Think of millions of different media images you are bombarded with every day. It is as important now to be able to read and make sense of these images as it has been to be able to read ordinary text. Imagine living all your life as the only family on your street. Then, one morning, you open the front door and discover houses all around you. You see neighbors tending their gardens and children walking to school. Where did all the people come from? What if the answer turned out to be that they had always been there? You just hadn't seen them. Internal combustion engine, enabling the driver to decide which source of power is appropriate for the travel requirements of given journey. Major US auto manufacturers are now developing feasible hybrid electric vehicles, and some are exploring fuel cell technology for their electric cars. A unique characteristic of online shopping environments is that they allow vendors to create retail interfaces with highly interactive features. One desirable form of interactivity from a consumer perspective is the implementation of sophisticated tools to assist shoppers in their purchase decisions by customizing the electronic shopping environment to their individual preferences. A world without light. Have you ever pictured a world without light? Just think how much we rely on man-made light sources in our lives. Without engineers, we wouldn't be able to live the way we do. No streetlights, no TV, no computer displays, no house light. Engineers design and build all these things. Method of learning. There is no single method of learning that guarantees success. How we learn, that depends on many different factors. And what works best for you will not necessarily be that same as the approach used for the other students, even they study the same course. We are all unique as learners, although some patterns emerge in any groups of students. Australian slang. Australians speak English, of course, but for many tourists and even some locals, Australian English only has tenuous links with mother tongue. Our speech is prepared with words and phrases whose arcane means understood only by the initiate. It is these colourful colloquialisms that Australian slang set to truly explain. Important value of literature. One of the important values of literature is that knowledge is our emotional life. The inner life that good review in their characters often gives us glimpses into some portion of ourselves. We can devote to, laugh, cry, trombo, dream, ponder, shriek, or rick by simply turning a page inside of turning our lives upside down. Girls outperform boys. Teenage girls are continuing to outperform boys in English, while the gender gap in achievement in math and science has almost disappeared. The figures show that last year, 80% of 14-year-old girls reached at least the expected level 5 in English, compared with 65% of boys. But in math, the girls are just 1% ahead of boys, while in science the difference is 2%. With a population of only just over 30 million living in the world's second largest country, Canada is justly renowned for vast tracts of wilderness untroubled by pollution either from industry or from intensive farming methods. A major conservation issue is the battle to stop the logging of virgin forest in northern Ontario and on the west coast. United Nations development efforts have profoundly affected the lives and well-being of millions of people throughout the world. Guiding the United Nations endeavours is the conviction that lasting international peace and security are possible only if the economic and social well-being of people everywhere is assured. New research shows that during the global financial crisis, workers who stayed in the jobs did not reduce their working hours, despite claims that cuts in hours have to prevent job losses. The study found that life of people who remained same employers stayed relatively unchanged. Augustus was given the powers of an absolute monarch, but he presented himself as the preserver of Republican traditions. He treated the Senate or State Council with great respect and was made consul year after year. He successfully reduced the political power of the army by retiring many soldiers but giving them land or money to keep their loyalty. Along with customary classes on subjects such as finance, accounting, and marketing, today's MBA students are enrolling on courses for environmental policy and stewardship. Indeed, more than half of business schools require a course in environmental sustainability or corporate social responsibility, according to a survey of 91 US business schools published in October 2005. Before the discovery of Australia, people in the Old World were convinced that all swans were white, an unassailable belief as it seemed completely confirmed by empirical evidence. The sighting of the first black swan might have been an interesting surprise for a few ornithologists, but that is not where the significance of the story lies. Pluto lost its official status as a planet yesterday, when the International Astronomical Union downsized the solar system from 8 to 9 planets. Although there had been passionate debate at the General Assembly meeting in Prague about the definition of a planet and whether Pluto met the specifications, the audience greeted the decision to exclude it with applause. The maximum yield of plants, determined by their genetic potential, is seldom achieved because factors such as insufficient water or nutrients, adverse climate condition, plant diseases, and insect damage will limit growth at some stage. Plants subjected to these biotic and abiotic constraints are said to be stressed. You used to think that being green was a luxury for your company, but climate change has made you realize that you can no longer ignore it. The buzz is about becoming carbon neutral, but where do you start? Consider your drivers. Do you want to become carbon neutral for marketing reasons, for financial reasons, or to help save the planet? The emergence of information technology has increased new products, processes, and distribution systems. New products include the computer, the internet, and digital TV. New processes include internet banking, automated inventory control, and automated teller machines. And new distribution systems include cable and satellite TV. Thus, a country might possess a sizable rural population but have an economic system in which the interests of the voters were predominantly related to their incomes, not to their occupations or location, and in such a country, the political system would be unlikely to include an important agrarian party. The purpose of the informative speech is to provide interesting, useful, and unique information to your audience. By dedicating yourself to the goals of providing information and appealing to your audience, you can take a positive step towards succeeding in your efforts as an informative speaker. To work effectively with the heterogeneous student populations found in our schools, educators have the responsibility of acknowledging the cultural backgrounds of their students and the cultural setting in which the school is located in order to develop effective